Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm pleased to be here with Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Mike Ellis, and Minister of Justice, Mickey Amery. We're announcing that government will introduce amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act to protect essential infrastructure, which in turn protects Alberta's economy and its people. Some amendments are focused on the southern border. Earlier this year, we created a 2-kilometer deep zone in Alberta's side of the Canada-US border and deployed the interdiction patrol team to secure it. Now we're moving that zone into the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act, so the definition of essential infrastructure is listed in one place. Alone, this would be just a bit of legislative housekeeping, but the amendments don't stop there. They also designate oil and gas production sites and facilities where emissions data and records are held as essential infrastructure. This amendment to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act provides an extra tool to safeguard essential infrastructure from interference, and that includes interference from Ottawa. I would certainly hope that the new Prime Minister has taken the time to read our Constitution, and I would direct him to pay specific attention to Section 92A, which gives the province, not the federal government, the exclusive jurisdiction over non-renewable natural resource development. Alberta will continue in its pursuit of doubling our oil and gas production to meet the growing global demand for energy. And we will not let Ottawa stand in our way. We will not tolerate the continuous unconstitutional overreaches made by the federal Liberal government. Measures like the emissions cap, the net zero electricity regs, the net zero electric vehicle mandate, and the energy industry advertising ban must be stopped now. And make no mistake, Alberta will do whatever it takes to shield our economy from the Liberals' growth-killing lunacy. These amendments we're introducing today would include denying federal workers access to our facilities and the information they contain. I will continue to fiercely and unapologetically stand up for Albertans and defend the best interest of our province, our economy, and our industry. This ongoing tariff dispute has proven now more than ever that Canada must build big and build fast to reach new global markets for export. Canadians and politicians from across the country are calling for new pipelines to be built, east, west, and north, to secure our future and end our reliance upon our southern trading partner. However, if the new Prime Minister wants to resume an old fight, well, we will. We'll fight tooth and nail. Because if we can't make these decisions and build, then it's so obvious, when it's so obviously in the national interest, then what kind of an economic future does Canada have? Today's amendments are a warning, but they're also an invitation to Ottawa. Let's talk. Let's rise to the occasion. Let's use Canada's riches to protect our nation. And with that, I'd like to ask Minister Mickey Amery to share more details about the amendments.
Well, thank you, Premier, and good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to be here today to share more about our amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act and how our amendments will continue to protect our province and our southern border and stand up against overreaches by the Liberal federal government. Alberta's Critical Infrastructure Defence Act was first introduced to protect essential infrastructure from trespassers, interference, and damage of any kind, especially those that could cause significant risk to the public safety of Albertans. This act protects essential infrastructure by creating offences under the act of trespassing, interfering with operations, or causing damage to property. Public safety is a top priority for our government, and that's no surprise. It's why in December our government announced a plan to secure the Alberta-US border to crack down on illegal activity and keep illicit drugs out of our province. One of these commitments to secure the border was to create a 2-kilometer buffer zone to be designated as essential infrastructure. Since then, we've taken swift action to amend the Critical Infrastructure Defence Regulation to designate this border zone as critical infrastructure, with plans to amend the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act this spring. And that's why in the House this afternoon, I will introduce Bill 45, the Critical Infrastructure Defence Amendment Act 2025. If passed, this bill would provide crucial amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act, and as I mentioned, further enhance security at the Alberta-US border and protect our province's economy and citizens from the harmful, job-killing federal emissions cap. Speaking of the federal emissions cap, Alberta's government is proposing amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act that would update the definition of essential infrastructure to add facilities where oil and gas production and emissions data and records are held, and to explicitly state that the Act applies to the federal government. These amendments are in line with the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada motion, which was passed in December of 2024, that introduced measures to stop a federal emissions cap from damaging the province's economy, industry, and its prosperity. As I mentioned before, as part of our continued efforts to strengthen security at the international border, amendments would move the border zone portion of the definition of essential infrastructure into the Act itself. With the Act being amended, it makes sense to update it to ensure the definition of essential infrastructure is fully captured in a single place. Currently, the 2 kilometer deep border zone north of the entire Alberta United States border is included in the Critical Infrastructure Defense Regulation. The inclusion of that 2 kilometer border zone to the definition of essential infrastructure provides peace officers with additional tools to protect the area from trespassing, interference, or damage when people have no lawful right, justification, or excuse to be in that area. I want to be absolutely clear. Individuals who are legally working, living, or traveling in that 2 kilometer zone may continue to do so unimpeded. Today's legislation being introduced outlines significant progress to protect essential infrastructure and the critical border zone. And these amendments also ensure our province has the ability to produce responsible energy and meet the world's growing demands. Public safety and Alberta's economic prosperity are two of our government's highest priorities. Whether we are strengthening border security or calling on the federal government to scrap its emissions cap, our government will continue to protect public safety and defend Alberta's interests when the federal government introduces policies that negatively impact our province. Thank you very much, and now I'll turn it over to Minister Ellis.
Good. Well, thank you, Minister, and thank you, Premier. I'll try and be brief here. Alberta's government, of course, has taken this very swift action to strengthen security along the southern border. At the end of last year, of course, we've deployed considerable resources to get boots on the ground as quickly as possible. The new Sheriff's Interdiction Patrol Team, of course, is playing a very key role in our ongoing efforts to stop drugs, gun smuggling, human trafficking, and of course, other illegal cross-border activities. Currently, we have 20 Alberta sheriffs that have been assigned to the IPT patrol to patrol the border between Alberta's 6 southern points of entry, with the 31 remaining sheriffs to be fully deployed, hopefully in the coming months. They are already making, of course, a significant difference on crime traveling in both directions, and I can assure you that our portion of the border is indeed secure. As they continue to focus on known hotspots of illegal activity and keeping a watchful eye over anything suspicious, and thanks to the government's $29 million investment in budget 2025, for the IPT, we now have more boots on the ground to detect and intervene in these crimes. And I will say this again, I can proudly say that our border is indeed secure. The pressure that we are now putting on offenders will only intensify in the coming weeks as the IPT's presence continues to grow. And today's announcement by the Attorney General will, of course, immensely add to the border security with the creation of the border red zone by amending regulations under the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act. Albertans can take comfort in knowing that their safety and security is and always will be non-negotiable under this government. We're going to continue to do whatever it takes to crack down on illegal activity taking place at our shared border. And with that, we will take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go into our media Q&A. Just a reminder for those on the phone and in the room, this press conference is under embargo until the legislation is tabled later today. We'll start off here in the room. One question, one follow-up. I see your hands. Wonderful. Then we'll go to the phones. We'll start with Michelle.
A question for, I guess, Premier or any one of you on stage. So Canada is facing an unprecedented threat to its economy, potentially its sovereignty from the United States. And I'm wondering if you could explain why it was a priority to add measures to prevent Canadian federal government inspectors to conduct emission cap inspections or to collect data.
Well, it's both. We have had two issues that have emerged since December. So the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act, we already signaled that we would be moving in this direction because the federal government has not taken their threat of an emissions cap off the table. This is the mechanism to be able to address that problem At the same time, we have the issue with the border that needs to be addressed. And in a separate press conference, we announced that we were creating this 2-kilometer zone. Both of them are going to be protected under the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act. When you're opening a bill, you make both changes at the same time. That's the reason.
But why this? I mean, you know, it's the threats are coming from, you know, the tariffs, right? That is the biggest threat. That's what a lot of people are worried about. Yet you're focusing some of your energies on the federal government.
The biggest
So
threat.
why is that?
Well, because the biggest threat to the Alberta economy has been the past 10 years of Liberal government that cancelled $176 billion worth of investment. We continue to face threats, whether it's the tanker ban off the West Coast, Bill C-69, which has still not been passed, net zero power regs, net zero cars, net zero buildings, methane caps, emissions caps. If they continue doing that, it'll crush our economy. So I would say that we face a dual threat. Yes, we have to deal with the tariffs, but we also equally have to deal with a federal Liberal government that has tried to crush our economy for the past 10 years. And we're just not going to let them do that anymore, especially now that we're seeing an unprecedented interest in trying to get pipelines built. East, west, and north. And so this is our signal to the federal government, especially since even with the new prime minister, still seems to be very enthusiastic about taking over our tier program and emissions caps and carbon pricing and what that would mean. We're just letting him know this is our business. Section 92A of the Constitution gives us the right to manage our resources, and we're going to assert that that includes the emission data that comes from those resources and the installations that we manage.
Thanks, Michelle. We'll go to Lisa, then to Shay.
Thanks. I'm hoping you can just clarify something because when we asked during the tech briefing, they directed these questions to you, which was kind of odd because it seems to me like a very technical question. How does the reporting on emissions data work currently in the private sector? Like, does the current emissions reporting process necessarily involve federal officials needing to physically go into these private facility, or would banning these federal employees not affect emissions reporting in any way practically?
Well, this is part of the issue, is that we don't have a single source of truth for emissions data. We found that when we were looking at our methane emissions. By our calculation, which is looking at source materials, they had reduced their emissions 45% from 2005 levels 2 years early. The federal government hired some outside organization to do some aerial scanning, and they came up with a different number. And so if we're going to have these kinds of disputes, we know that there needs to be a single source of truth when it comes to actual on-site data, and we're going to collect that, and then we'll make sure that it is shared. But we believe that because the federal government has come up with different numbers at different times for their own purposes, we think that we actually need to get real data. And because we're the ones on the ground, we'll be the ones able to do that work.
So this bill doesn't explicitly ban emissions data reporting by private companies to the federal government.
They will report to us. It's our data, and then we will report to the federal government. Remember, the energy companies, especially since we own the resource and we permit the resource, they develop the resource on our behalf. And so in doing so, we have an obligation to collect the data, and we'll report it to the federal government. But
that still doesn't answer, like, is this currently happening? Like, is this a hypothetical ban on if sometime in the future the federal government decides to send officials into the Suncor offices in Calgary? Like, this is a hypothetical ban of something that isn't even happening?
I don't know if it's hypothetical. I mean, we observed when they were wanting to do water testing, that they were going onto people's property in Saskatchewan and doing water testing as a way of trying to, I think, develop some pretext for new emissions data they were going to come in with on fertilizer. And the Saskatchewan government did something quite similar in saying federal agents are not going to be allowed to just show up on people's private land to start testing their dugouts and water. And so this has already been demonstrated in the past that there have been issues, and we just are anticipating that if there are future issues, we're closing that door. The emissions data, we have to remember the other part of it is the government has made it illegal for companies to celebrate their emissions reduction. The Bill C-59 I referenced, they're not allowed to proactively talk about their positive progress that they're making on emissions because it's called greenwashing, and then they could also ultimately face charges. So the entity that is shielded from those laws are the provincial government. So they've actually put us into a position that if we want to be able to collect and report emissions data, we have to collect it ourselves, and we have to be able to report it ourselves. So that's what we're going to do.
Thanks, Lisa. And Michelle, we're going to go to Shay. You've already had two questions.
What happens if a company doesn't comply?
Well, we license them, so they're
Yeah,
going
but
to,
there's
it'll
nothing, I
be,
don't see anything in here that would
we have the ability.
suggest that there's a penalty for them.
Well, we can make that a condition of us doing the leases. So there's lots that you can do,
Retroactive.
there's lots that you can do in regulation. But
Retroactively?
Well,
We do
but,
that?
but we intend to enforce the law. And I would think that the companies are probably going to be pretty happy with the fact that we're willing to take this reporting obligation off their hands. They'll probably be quite happy that because we will have a government-approved source of information that perhaps they'll be able to then talk about, they'll be able to cite us when we're talking about our emissions reduction success. So the federal government has put us into a box, and we're finding a way to be able to make sure that we're collecting the data and able to report the data with the rules that they put in place.
All right, and Chase, you have a question? Or
Yes, yeah, still questions. I guess just a couple, following up on your answer to Lisa's question, you had mentioned federal agents just would not be able to do that. Is the suggestion there that they would be arrested, and by whom? And then just as a follow-up, while we're still in the legal sphere, Canada's top court has ruled that under the Constitution's peace, order, and good government clause, Ottawa has the authority to enact laws that impact the entire country, such as emissions. So are you anticipating any sort of legal challenge from Ottawa on this, and what is your argument to defend against
I'll
it?
let Mike talk about trespassing, and I'll let Mickey talk about the extensive way that they've used peace, order, and good government that may not be good lawmaking, and we'd be intending to challenge that too. Well, you go first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just your question was in regards to,
Trespassing. How do we
Federal
enforce it?
agents, and the thing had mentioned that federal agents would not be authorized into those centers to collect that emissions data. So I'm wondering, like, would there be
Well-
someone that would arrest those federal officials? What's the plan there?
well, I arrest the federal officials. I mean, look, property rights is a big thing in the province of Alberta. Let's be very clear on that. I would like to think that there'd be a level of cooperation with the federal government whereby nobody actually has to get arrested. I would say that like anything, it's about a matter of talking to people, and hopefully if there is a requirement for somebody to go on somebody else's land, that they talk to the landowner. I think it's completely inappropriate, and I agree with what the Premier mentioned in regards to Saskatchewan. Nobody should have a right to just go on somebody else's property, whether you're being directed by the federal government or not, and just go onto somebody's property and do whatever they think that they've been directed to do. So I'm not going to go down the road whether or not hypothetically somebody's going to be arrested or not arrested. Right now, we would just really hope that people in the federal government abide by, really in respect to property owners and property rights.
Thank you very much. And to the second part of your question, I mean, we have a history with the federal government and its lack of respect for Alberta's jurisdiction. We talked a little bit about Section 92 today. We talked a little bit about our exclusive ability to develop our natural resources. We've seen in the past the federal government enact nationwide legislation, which was deemed unconstitutional. We've had some recent wins in court with respect to the Impact Assessment Act. We know that the federal government did not respect the Supreme Court's decision in that regard. And what they ended up doing was making, in our view, inconsequential changes to the Impact Assessment Act in order to get around the Supreme Court of Canada's decision. We take the position that we're going to respect the court, we're going to abide by the court, especially when it is a ruling from our country's highest court. However, the federal government has not done that. And so we continue to take these measures to protect our industry, to protect the people who are looking to invest in Alberta. And quite frankly, with the decisions that the federal government has made with respect to our oil and gas industry, many companies are questioning whether they should invest in Canada. We want to make sure that Alberta is the jurisdiction that they invest in, that they know that there's a government that will defend them if they do, and we're up for the challenge and we'll be there if we need to be.
Yeah, just a follow-up, I guess, taking away from that, then you do feel confident if there was such a challenge. And then also going back to the 2-kilometer deep border zone, it was designated essential infrastructure under that regulation back in January. You had mentioned something about additional powers or extra tools for peace officers. I'm just wondering what explicitly today gives, can assure Albertans that that border is safer in light of this legislation.
Well, most certainly the border is secure and it is safe, and we've done a number of measures both through public safety and through justice to make sure that that's happening. We talked a little bit about the ability for peace officers to identify threats to lay charges if there is a suspected act of trespass, for example. We know that the peace officers will be able to, they have the tools now with the amendments in order to exercise their discretion. We can't speculate on what the peace officers will do in that area, but I certainly know that this amendment will give them the tools that they need to make those assessments, to determine if there is a threat, and to act if they need to be.
Yeah, just from a police officer's perspective, and I appreciate that, it really is about lawful placement, right? Like, any law enforcement officer in Canada, quite frankly, I actually see in North America, has to be lawfully placed. And so, and then what is going to happen after that lawful placement, once that investigation starts to go down? Maybe it's a conversation that leads to nothing. Maybe it's a conversation that leads to something more. But really, the tool that the minister is referring to is about lawful placement for law enforcement officers.
Thanks, Shay. We're going to take a couple questions from the phone now and then come back to the room if we have time. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
Jean-Emmanuel Fortier, Radio-Canada.
Hello, good day, bonjour, Premier. First question, it's still to clarify a bit, if someone wants to go to the, headquarters of Synovus or Tamarack Valley, and if the company doesn't want them, they can just tell their security guard not to allow them in and or call the police already. So why do you need to sort of add that into legislation? What will change? I'm not completely clear with this.
Well, what we're asserting is that we own the emissions data that comes from the oil and gas operations that we license, we permit, and that develop it on our behalf. As you know, I mean, there are pretty clear divisions between what constitutes federal property versus provincial property. As you know, during the Jasper fires, we had to wait to be invited in to be able to assist the federal government in their response. And we've also played a supporting role as they've done the redevelopment of that area. And that's because federal parks like Jasper fall under federal jurisdiction. And so we are asserting the reverse, that these are provincial jurisdiction, and that if they want to get emissions data, they have to come to us as the owner and licensee or licensor of these properties. So I would just expect that's the way our country should operate. That certainly seems to be what it's supported in the Constitution, and we're just asserting that they're not going to be able to work around us to be able to get the data that we own. We will share it with them as we collect it, but we are going to be the ones who are collecting this emissions data. It belongs to us.
Okay, thank you for that. As a follow-up, but property rights were mentioned. It's slightly off topic, but still about a relationship between Alberta and the United States. We've received many reports that small business owners who bought and paid American products like wine and bourbon cannot access their own product at the AGLC warehouse in St. Albert. They cannot sell it, and they have to pay rent on it as well. Why is the government or the Crowd Corporation essentially seizing private property that's already paid for?
We've realized we have to implement the policy a little bit differently in Alberta because we do have a private system and we do have a respect for private property rights. So we have just discussed through our cabinet process how we might make an amendment to that rule to allow for those who've already paid and owned the product to be able to deliver it to those who want to sell it. But we won't be ordering any new product. We would have, I think the numbers we were given is that there was something like $76 million worth of product that is already been paid for or is on hold because of agents having done the licensing themselves individually. And so we just felt like that wasn't fair. In other provinces, because they own all parts of that and they own it on consignment and so are able to return it or not take the hit from not selling it. It's a little bit of a different scenario, but because we've got a private sector market, we realized we had to make that modification. But until we understand what the Americans are doing on tariffs on April the 2nd, we continue to have measures to support buying local. You can make your old fashioned with Canadian whiskey just as well as you can with American whiskey. So we hope that Albertans understand that if our people are being hurt here and our businesses are being hurt here, we're really encouraging them to buy local, buy Canadian, and buy from countries that honor their free trade agreements.
Thank you. And we'll take one more from the phones, and we might have time for one more question here from the room. Operator, could you put through the next caller, please?
Rick Bell, Post Media.
Good afternoon. I've got a bit of a cold, so it's going to be a gravelly question. Poll after poll is showing that the Carney Liberals could win an election, and that is coming up. Premier, what are you prepared to deal with that? To deal with that possible, some people would say probable, but let's just keep it possible reality, especially in light of the fact that when the Liberals won a second term, there was huge frustration in Alberta. When they won a third term, there was even greater frustration in Alberta over that victory. If they get a fourth term, I'll leave it at that. How are you prepared to deal with what could come out of a victory by Carney and the Liberals?
Well, I can tell you, President Donald Trump seems to want the Liberals to win again. He gave an interview with Laura Ingraham yesterday saying that he'd prefer for the Liberals, and you have to wonder why. I think it's because the Liberals have made us weak over the last 10 years, and he wants to see that weakness continue. I certainly don't. I want to see us be the strong and united country that I know we can be, getting our products to market and working together collaboratively to do so. So I have always felt that the key to having a united country is to respect the constitutional authority and jurisdiction of each province. I see that Quebec feels exactly the same way. They did a fair deal panel, very much inspired, I think, by what we did here in Alberta. And I think that you're seeing that the provinces are exerting their authority far more than they ever had in the past because we have to. And you've seen the provinces work in a spirit of collaboration better than I've ever seen in the time that I've been in this job, or even in the past 10 years. And so I'm prepared to continue to support Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada. That's been my mantra right from the beginning. And I hope that we have a partner in the federal government who's willing to accept this new reality. I quite frankly think that any government that's going to advocate that we stop building pipelines or block building pipelines or block a province from getting their product to market, I would hope that Canadians wouldn't vote for that government.
And supplementary, if that were to happen, how would you deal with the almost certain frustration, disappointment, frustration, and even anger that there would be yet another Liberal government in Ottawa that might be unfriendly to Alberta?
Well, I would say that I've got a term sheet, and my term sheet has a few key things on it. Number one, respect Section 92A of the Constitution, which we are reinforcing here today with this legislation. Allow us the autonomy to develop our resources and get them to market. Number two, repeal the offending sections of Bill C-69, which prevents us from being able to build pipelines, end the tanker ban off the West Coast, which prevents us from exporting our product internationally, end the net zero power regs, end the net zero vehicle standards, end any talk of an emissions cap, end any talk of a methane emissions cap, end the war on plastics, which we also, incidentally, was another area that we won at the federal court, and treat Alberta as a partner. Those are very simple things. Those should not be difficult things to agree to because it's enshrined in our Constitution. So I will put that term sheet before whoever wins the next election, and I guess we'll see what the federal response is.
Thanks, Premier. Thanks, Rick. We have time for one more question. We're going to go to James in the back here.
Premier, some people would argue that Mark Carney has an almost religious attachment to net zero, and that has a lot of people worried. One energy expert I spoke with today said that Mark Carney is going to come for Alberta in a similar manner as Trudeau and Guilbeault. How worried are you?
I think there's a real danger that the new Prime Minister is worse than the old Prime Minister. I haven't read his book, Values, but if one of his values is keeping oil and gas in the ground and he thinks Alberta can operate on wind and solar and battery power, he's got another thing coming. So I will be able to make our case very clearly, especially in the changing environment we find ourselves in, that our world needs more energy. They need more energy from a reliable democratic source and ally. And the world is very interested in what Alberta has to offer. And I would hope that they would work in partnership with us to be able to get that to market. So I haven't had that conversation with the new Prime Minister yet. I intend to, and I'll have to vet it at that time. But everything I've seen so far suggests to me that, ending the retail carbon tax just so consumers can't see it when they go and fill up their gas or when they look at their home heating bill, but then walloping our industry with potentially higher taxes, that's just not going to fly. So that's what I'm hearing from the Prime Minister, is that he's doing an action to get political popularity, but the effect on our industry here is no different than what we saw under Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So can we work through that? I don't know yet, but I can tell you I'm not encouraged by what I've seen so far.
And did you have a follow-up, James, or is that it? Perfect. Well,
I'll take that question.
No. One question, no follow-up. Yeah, yourself. Yeah.
Chinese tariffs are expected to come in tomorrow. That's going to make an impact on canola exports. How concerned are you for Alberta farmers now dealing with tariffs from two biggest trading partners? And is the province planning for any sort of support?
Well, we have to look at what we're seeing. I mean, the Americans are expecting us to follow suit on the tariffs that they're putting on China, and we did. And the consequence is that Western farmers are bearing the impact of that. And the tariffs I'm talking about are steel, aluminum, and electric vehicles. And as Scott Moe pointed out, no one wants the Chinese electric vehicles anyway. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of appetite even in the Canadian market for electric vehicles. And yet we've created a tariff war now with China that is going to harm our pork producers and our canola producers. So there's an equity issue there, and I think it is a divide and conquer strategy. That said, my agriculture minister, R.J. Sigurdsson, says that seed is the predominant export, canola seed, to China, and I believe that is not included in the new export tariffs. So it should impact it should reduce the impact on our producers. And there is a bit of an array of good fortune. Imperial Oil has a renewable diesel refinery that is going to be open within, I think, by July. And I'm told that the amount of canola that they're going to need to feed that renewable diesel refinery is about 2.5 million tons a year, which just happens to be the amount that we're exporting to China right now. So I think at least on canola, there's a potential for a made in Canada solution to be able to help our farmers. I don't have the solution on pork yet. I say I've doubled my bacon intake just as a measure of support. I've also doubled my beef intake as well, just as a measure of support to that sector as well. But the sooner we can get past energy wars and food wars, the better for the world. I mean, energy security, food security is absolutely essential. And I think we are the solution that the world is looking for. But it is going to be a bit of a rough patch with both of our largest trading partners. Alberta is no exception. Alberta has China as our second largest trading partner. There's $10 billion worth of product that goes between the two jurisdictions. It's much smaller than our relationship with America, which is $188 billion, but it is still very significant, especially in food products. So we're quite worried about it.
Perfect. And that's all the time we have for
Thanks,
questions
everyone.
today.